Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
I cannot tell you how beyond thrilled I was today when the Speaker of the House election actually went through. There was not a never-ending circus of chaos and nonsense and, yes, indeed, shenanigans afoot that would have cost me all of the time to write the show and edit the show. Whenever there is one of these big House Speaker elections or budget reconciliations like is coming up or a continuing resolution, it's a bit of an adventure to get the show written. You can't write it when the news breaks for the first round of voting, because then about an hour or so later, it changes. And then it changes again. And then it goes back to the thing it had changed from before then. And then it jumps ahead 2 spaces. And then this congressman's run off and doing this. This one's holding a little whiny toddler tantrum press conference. And when I saw that Speaker Johnson, who has the endorsement of President Trump, who is a better Speaker of the House than Kevin McCarthy was, at least from an ideological standpoint, although I've argued many times before, the Speaker of the House position is not just this idealistic Speaker of the House of Representatives like the job was meant to be. It has become something completely different. In the same way that a car mechanic is not the same thing as a car salesman, the same that the House Speaker position is not the same as it was many long years ago. So, Speaker Johnson has earned the ire of a couple of different wings of the Republican Party. Some of them deserved, some of them not deserved. But no matter. We had a Speaker-House fisticuffs match between a lot of the populist members of the party and the establishment and the conservative and the libertarian-leaning wings of the party back in October of 23. And they ousted McCarthy. And then after several rounds of voting, which was a bad time for that circus right before an election year, they ended up getting Speaker Mike Johnson in, who was immediately considered by some of the same groups of the party to be not very good. And then Donald Trump endorsed him. And so going through to this election, a couple of the online personalities had suggested that, Speaker Johnson was on his way out. It didn't matter that Trump had supported him, that he had endorsed him. It was actually going to be Byron Donalds or something like that. No. I like Byron Donalds, great representative from down in Florida. Was not going to be Byron. It was going to be Johnson. But there we went. Got all of the representatives in there, and we had our speaker vote, and Johnson came up 3 short. Now, he could only afford to lose 1 vote because Republicans have an incredibly slim majority in the House. That's for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's because the RNC is just now learning that you got to have a ground game in elections. You actually have to get people out there and play by the same rules that the Democrats play by. Now, you can complain about the rules. I know I do. You can whine about the rules. I don't recommend that. You can say that the rules that the Democrats play by, as far as ballot harvesting and things like that are concerned, are unjust and unfair. But you got to play by the rules people at the table are playing at, ladies and gentlemen. And so when Republicans, if they do learn, they are slow learners, treat the midterm and the next presidential election like they treated Pennsylvania in this last election, then you might actually see Republicans draw a larger majority in the House. Now, Republicans don't have that majority right now. So the idea that Republicans have this major, big, huge freight train of momentum in the House is simply not the case. So Johnson loses 3 votes. Number one, he loses Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie is a hardcore libertarian. By the way, that's not an insult or a pejorative. Hardcore libertarian means that when it comes to being a libertarian, Massie fits the bill. He is ideologically consistent in that he is a libertarian. And as he is wearing a custom little display that shows the national debt ticking upwards infinitely, that is his primary concern. Understandable. Do I agree with his decision not to vote for Johnson? No, but ideologically, I do not match precisely with Thomas Massie. Now, on the other side of things, you had Representative Self from Texas, no pun intended, and then Representative Norman of South Carolina, who also voted no against Speaker Johnson. And finally, thank God, I'm so glad we were finally able to see it. Johnson, immediately after it showed that he was not going to, in that first ballot, have the number of votes he needed, he immediately stepped down from the dais, down from the podium. He walked right to a back room, and he almost grabbed Self and Norman by the ears and dragged them into a back room, where I made this joke earlier, actually on Merritt Street today, where I said Johnson walked in, he pressed one button, and waiting on speakerphone was Donald Trump and Chairman Whatley of the RNC, who clearly informed the two representatives who were holding up all of the stuff that needs to get done in 18 months. If you want to act like children right now, like the members of Congress who acted like children back in October of 23, enjoy running your primary with no money and no support. We will make sure that happens. And then, presto, Self and Norman switch their votes. Then Johnson brings the Congress in, and they do their oaths of office, and now they are getting to work, which is good because there is only an 18-month window until everyone is in the chief campaign for the midterms role. So that's the Republican side of the story. On the other side of the aisle, you had, well, the absolute embarrassment that the more progressive wing of the Democrat Party has become. Oh, I should mention, the Wall Street Journal does now report that Representative Self did actually have a last-minute phone call with President-elect Donald Trump. So as much as you know, it pains me to say I was right, especially on the outlandish analogies and claims that I like to throw out. Every once in a while, it is nice to hit one right on the the head there. So on the Democrat side of the aisle, the progressive wing is having a wonderful time. Like Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, who received the second most votes for Speaker of the House, Barack Obama Jr., and he struggles for a number of reasons. One of the reasons he struggles, Obama would say something, and it would be discordant with something that he had said previously, but it wasn't blindly oppositional. Obama was aware of things he'd said years, maybe even decades earlier on in life, and he would say he grew or he changed or he's updated the phrasing. Hakeem Jeffries, who has probably a whopping 3 IQ points to rub together, was just out there claiming today that there was no one on the Democrat side of the aisle that was participating in election denialism. And of course, footage shows that Hakeem Jeffries was one of the top election deniers back in 2016. Beautiful.
It's okay. There are no election deniers on our side of the aisle.
Seems to me that there's a cloud of illegitimacy that continues to hang over 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And that patriotic Americans have a responsibility to try to figure out what the heck happened in terms of the malignant tumor that seemed to have been embedded in that 2016 campaign. What did the president know?
Regular order.
When did he know it?
Regular order.
And how do we prevent this type of malignant activity from happening again?
Ah, boy, howdy. I sure do love when people say the same stupid crap they deny later. It really makes my heart warm with the joy of keeping receipts longer than 32 and a half seconds. Well, Hakeem Jeffries, the great orator, then got up in front of the country and promised that we would fart harder for the right to vote. No, that's not my misspeak. That would be his.
The American dream possible. We will fight hard for the freedom to vote.
Now look, as a musician who's played for many a year in churches, I am no stranger to an individual saying, hey, turn your hymnals to this hymn, and then they sing the first verse, set my fart, oh dear father, set my heart, oh dear father. We've all been there. But to watch Hakeem Jeffries act so high and mighty, and then get out there and tell the country to fart hard, man, I tell you, just, a little Freudian slip there. Speaking of farting harder, Kamala Harris got up in front of the Senate, because that is the vice president's role, to be the president of the Senate, and I guess forgot or has no idea what the United States Pledge of Allegiance is. Here's what that looked like.
Join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the
I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the eagle. I just got to be honest with you guys, though. If there was anything in that pledge about the wheels on the bus or the significance of the passage of time, Kamala would have nailed that. And for what it's worth, senior advisors have informed us that behind closed doors, Kamala Harris can say the pledge better than anybody in the White House. In fact, sometimes she says the Pledge of Allegiance so fast and so perfect, other aides and world leaders can hardly keep up. So before you slam Kamala Harris for not being able to say things that those of us who actually went to school in the United States of America and not Canada know how to do, maybe walk a mile in Willie Brown's shoes, okay? That's not the only embarrassment from the House of Representatives today. And I'm not just talking about the voting members. We'll be back to talk about that in just a second. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
There was one moment in particular today during the opening of the 119th Congress that made me, at least as a former teacher, I just instantly knew that the education system was irrevocably broken in this country. Number two, I was very much assured that this next 4 years was going to be chef's kiss fantastic. And there was also a moment that I laughed from the deepest part of my stomach. So a Democratic representative from the U.S. Virgin Islands, who I should mention, at least that a friend of the show, Siraj Hashimi, who points out a couple of really hilarious things over on X. He brought up that the representative Stacey Plaskett from the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is a U.S. territory, it is not a state. He pointed out this is the same Stacey Plaskett who solicited campaign donations from Jeffrey Epstein and reached out to meet with him after his child sex crimes were publicly known. That all aside, Stacey Plaskett stood up when they were calling names for the speaker vote tally. And she got all up in the parliamentarian's face. And I'm going to let you take a look at one of the more interesting outrage clips that I've seen in, I'd say, at least a month.
Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry. I note that the names of the representatives from the Americas, Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia were not called.
All right.
Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry. I note that the names of the representatives...
Real quick thing. So I wanted to play back that parliamentary inquiry thing. First of all, a parliamentary inquiry means the rules are rather confusing. I would like you to clarify. Now, Robert's Rules of Order is a very fancy way of running a meeting. And it's sometimes very useful. Sometimes it's absolutely ridiculous. The reason that sometimes parliamentary procedure is absolutely ridiculous is you get these moments in which people want to grandstand and act like fools. And so they will ask a question using words that do not mean what actually comes out of their mouth hole. So she wants to file a complaint. Or she's saying there is something I do not understand about the rules of the United States House of Representatives. And as you're going to hear, her complaint has to do with the actual governing laws of the United States Constitution. But I have another quick little nitpick here. Nothing bothers me more than an individual who is reading a list of territories or names, and then they get like super ethnic in their accent to try to impress people. Now, there are words that I pronounce the way that a lot of my friends have pronounced them over the years. That happens. But when you are listing a group of areas like, oh, Samoa, this island, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. Are you serious? Really? You do realize that people from Puerto Rico don't actually like roll their R's for 15 and a half syllables and like shunt their chin forward. But I digress. We'll let her continue on her very important parliamentary question.
From the Americas, Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia were not called, representing collectively 4 million Americans.
And the Democrats all clap for her. Yay, you're so brave! They stand. So she's saying that the representatives of these United States territories, which are given non-voting positions in the House of Representatives because they are territories or districts, they're not states, therefore they cannot have voting members of the House of Representatives of these United States. She's upset because she says, well, there are lots of people here. And so she's going to go on her rant.
Mr. Speaker, collectively the largest per capita of veterans in this country.
Does the gentlelady have a parliamentary
I
inquiry?
asked why they were not called.
So she asks why they were not called. This is her entire shtick, and she complains and says, oh, this is wrong. We should be allowed to vote on the Speaker of the House. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, it's awful. By the way, that's not actually a question. She just wanted to complain. And she makes a couple of different ad garbage arguments and false equivalencies in there, but we'll pick that apart real quick. Her argument is that there are U.S. citizens who reside in territories, not states. And so therefore, because they represent U.S. citizens in these territories, that they in the House of Representatives should be given the right to vote on the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who, by the way, in the case of an electoral tie or no clear electoral 270 majority, gets to pick the President of the United States. So, a high-stakes position. Now, a couple of key things here. Number one, territories are not allowed to vote in the Electoral College. They are not allowed to cast votes in Congress because they do not pay federal taxes. They are not states here in the country. Now, to be a state in the United States comes with a list of privileges that only come with being a state here in the U.S. Additionally, there's also a series of responsibilities that your state has to upkeep that the different U.S. territories do not. This has been very established for quite a long time, and it's explicitly stated in the United States Constitution. Now, are there ways that Samoa, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, that those individuals contribute to federal programs? Yes. Now, here's the catch. They don't contribute the same amount that you and I contribute by percentage or gross. Not only that, they also have caps on federal programs that can apply to those territories. So the argument that people in DC make all the time, no taxation without representation, they're not taxed in the same way that you and I are. They pay taxes to their territory. And by the way, the territorial legislature that represents them, for example, like in Puerto Rico, has agreed to those terms. It's not done against their will. That's nonsense. Now, for those saying, well, why aren't they just made states? And some imbecile today decided to make the case that all Congress needed to do was pass a law, and so therefore it's those stinky Republicans, guys. Duh, that's the problem. They won't pass that bill. Well, there is actually a little bit more to it than just Congress passing a bill and then presto, a state is made. No, here are the steps for a territory becoming a state of these United States. First of all, the territory has to have a popular vote in which the territory's citizens or legal residents vote in favor of becoming a state. Now, this must be a fair popular vote. So in 2020 and 2024, Puerto Rico put forward a referendum that is non-binding. It's basically just a fancy poll to their citizens on the island of Puerto Rico and said, do you want to become a state? Now, that's not the only thing that you put on the ballot. On a ballot about statehood, you actually have to put, do you want to become a state? Do you want to continue to be a territory? Do you want to be independent? And then there's like 4 or 5 other options because there's a lot of different things you can be as a region. And in 2024, they narrowed it down to 3 options. Do you want to be a state? Do you want to be a territory? Or do you want to be none of the above? That's not considered a fair ballot. So that's the first step. So let's assume they did the fair ballot and they approve it. Then there has to be a constitutional convention by that territory's government to draft a state constitution. You can't just govern willy-nilly. It cannot just be the territory constitution. You have to draft an official constitution for the state of the Virgin Islands, for the state of Puerto Rico, for the state of Alberta. Then you have to have a petition from the territory to Congress. Then Congress has to pass an enabling act that authorizes the territory to draft the Constitution and apply for statehood. Then Congress has to review it. It has to go through committee. Depending on the territory that is being given statehood, it has to be voted either with a 51 vote majority in the Senate or a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate. Then the president has to sign it. And by the way, places like Washington, D.C. don't qualify because Constitution said, do not make Washington, D.C. a state. That's not what it's for. So, given those particular things, That's like fourth grade civics. So when you see some goober get out and shout and scream and rant and yell that, you know, there's repression and American colonialism happening, and the colonialism is just a buzzword. They don't actually know or understand what makes colonialism bad or good. They can't tell you. They just say racisming and then call it a day. It should be noted that whenever you see someone making the argument that the territories need to be made states because, oh, there are veterans, which, by the way, we're not drafted and conscripted into service, which has nothing to do with taxation or representation, by the way. They are represented by territorial legislatures. And if they wanted to move out of the territory and into a U.S. state, they could at any time. Just like if I wanted California's programs and benefits, I can move to California. I'm not entitled to California benefits in Indiana. That's not how it works. Thank God. Individuals who complain about this, who haven't done the things to get statehood, but are going to complain about not having statehood. It's like someone eating chicken they made for dinner and then complaining that the chicken is raw. Well, they took the chicken off of the stove 10 minutes before it was finished cooking. Like, you don't see the disconnect of you taking the chicken off the stove and now you're complaining you have raw chicken. Homie, that's a you problem. We'll be back in a second to talk a little bit about Joe Biden because the old man is active. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Okay, we are...
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Well, old Joe Biden, he's got just a little bit more in him. One more reunion tour before he heads off to that glorious nursing home. And is it embarrassing? Yes. Is it awkward? Yes. But it does appear to be just the most embarrassing cover of all time for the shady things that his team is trying to get across his desk before Joe Biden leaves office. So there are all kinds of things that Biden is interfering with. Some of those things I do think should receive a little bit of review before they're brought into view. So something that I like, at least at the moment, is Biden taking a look at Nippon Steel, the Japanese steel company, purchasing U.S. steel. I think that should be looked at. I'm not saying that it should be completely blocked. I'm saying that let's actually have some adults who understand economics and industrial policy, not who have pronouns in their bio, look at something before it's finished. Then there are some things that are really dangerous. Biden is trying, this is according to several sources on the left and the right, trying to craft an executive order that would ban offshore oil and gas development in several different U.S. coastal water regions. And the way that this executive order is apparently trying to be crafted is to try to make it permanent. Now, because the administrative states become such a big thing, and so many of the United States laws have been relegated to regulations passed by agencies and executive orders from the hand of the president instead of where it's supposed to come from, being, the freaking Congress of the United States, there is kind of a ping pong slapping someone with a fish back and forth game for the last couple of administrations, in which day one, president comes in and they undo a bunch of executive orders from the previous administration, and then they sign in 2 bajillion executive orders of their own. And this is, Bush did this with Clinton, and then Obama did it with Bush, and then Trump did it with Obama, and then Biden did it with Trump, and then we all felt the effects of Biden rescinding all of the immigration executive orders with Trump. And now Trump is going to come in and do this to Biden. Biden is trying to figure out, again, according to sources like Bloomberg, that there might be a way to sort of kind of make the executive order more permanent by writing the regulation to need the approval of Congress to rescind. If you're going to write in a regulation that Congress needs to change it, then Congress has to approve it in the first place. So not likely that will stick. When he's not doing that, Biden is pushing judges up for nomination, signing them on through as quickly as possible. And the claims that Biden is making about these particular judges are kind of wild.
These judges will be independent, they'll be fair, and they'll be impartial. And they'll respect the rule of law. And most importantly, I know it sounds, I never thought I'd be saying this, they'll uphold the Constitution.
So I have a little bit of a problem with Biden suggesting that the judges he's going to appoint will uphold the law and respect the rule of law, given that he's pardoning, child molesters and giving clemency to anyone out there who he thinks was wronged, like, his son. And not to mention any possible preemptive pardons that he's considering before he leaves office. Very, very weird stuff to suggest, but we actually have footage of these judges that Biden wants to put forward being the exact kind of partisan that Biden claims they're not being at all. Here's one of these judges arguing with Senator Kennedy of Louisiana.
Saying that illegal immigration should not be criminalized is a position, is it not?
It is. What I'd like to add is that everything that I wrote while I was an advocate, not a sitting judge.
Oh, I see. That makes a difference. Did you mean it when you wrote it?
When I wrote it?
Did you mean it?
I meant it when I wrote it because...
Okay, but you don't mean it now?
I do not mean it now.
So if you take off your advocate hat today, do you have your advocate hat on today?
I am no longer an advocate. I'm a sitting magistrate judge.
Okay, so you don't tell the truth when you're an advocate, but you do when you're not? Is it okay to lie if you're an advocate?
I don't follow the question.
All right, so a little bit of word games there in the Senate of the United States. So the argument that Kennedy is making is, so you're an advocate. You clearly believed when you were an advocate that if you immigrate illegally, if you cross the border illegally, if you take part in the United States services, you cut in line in the immigration system. All of those who immigrated legally, you cut in front of them, and you come in and occupy the resources of your community, of the federal government. Do you find that violation of those several sections of the United States Code, do you think that should be illegal? Well, there was a time when that individual said, I don't think that should be illegal. And so Kennedy then asks him, well, was that just because you were an activist and you were an advocate? Or is the change in your mind a change that occurred because you took on a new position or because you no longer believe that? There are things that when I was younger, I believed that I do not believe anymore because I've received more information. I've changed my mind after looking at additional evidence, or the stupidity of youth is evident to me now, and I no longer believe maybe some of the grandiose or blanket sweeping statements that I made in my youth. Those are acceptable answers in a committee because we all understand that. However, it's a very different thing if you, as an individual, suggest illegal immigration should not be criminal. And well, now that you're a judge, I understand, I have to act differently. Yes. Your morals still govern the way that you judge. And if you're going to be a district court judge in the state of California, where there is a lot of illegal immigration cases that happen quite consistently, then it does in fact matter. So if you're going to suggest that your judges that you're going to bring forward are nonpartisan, and they tell you that, from the deepest, they promise that they will set aside their personal beliefs to uphold. When you're looking at an individual making rulings with almost unilateral authority in an immigration case, that's not good enough. And the end of the administration sweep through to get absolutely everything done right before we get to the next administration is getting shadier and shadier with each passing administration, which, believe it or not, brings us to a couple of questions from Mail Time up next, and then a bit of a bonus segment afterwards where we're going to be talking with Ron Coleman. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
Winter weather is on.
Mail time. Mail time. Mail time.
On the Tony Kinnett Cast.
All right, a couple of questions. Mail time works like this. By the way, you head over to tonykinnett.com. And if you spell my last name correctly on the first try, I hear you get $5. Then you head over, there's a little contact tab, and you send in a question there. Sometimes the questions are genuine. Sometimes the questions are extra stupid, and I like those. Sometimes the question are jaded insults. I love those as well. We're going to get through a few of those. Also, the YouTube comment section over on youtube.com/dailysignal. So we have got a great few questions. First of all, with a huge winter storm coming in over the weekend, this first question is from Freddie. And he asks, is 6 loaves of bread enough? Now, that, of course, is the most serious and important question, because whenever a snowstorm is incoming, everyone suddenly feels the need to make several days' worth of French toast. And so all of the eggs and the milk and the bread are gone. And no syrup, I guess. So syrupless French toast, which just sounds really sad. What do you get for your long-term snow-in kind of grocery trip? I'm going to make a recommendation to you from the bottom of my heart. If it's getting ready to snow, what you're going to do is get yourself the best kinds of meat that you can get your hands on. I, however, for example, yours truly, I enjoy getting a lot of fresh ground sausage so that one day I can have artery-clogging biscuits and gravy. The kind that's so good you have it for breakfast and lunch. Can I get an amen? And with that, you then have different things you can make with the sausage that isn't just going to be French toast every day. You can use a little sausage for some Italian dishes in the evening. Other than that, just go to the grocery like normal. Don't be a goober. This next one is from Mouser, and he asks, why don't you take live calls on the show? There are 2 reasons that I don't take live calls on the show. Reason number 1 is because Allison, the board operator, who would likely be taking those calls, I really don't want to give her a panic attack by wondering if the individuals that are calling in are going to drop lovely little slurs for the FCC to give me a hard time over later. You got to have a quick reflex on that censor button. That's pretty much it. That's the only reason that we don't usually take live calls. So we do this to kind of make up for it as a bit of a cop-out. All right, this next question is from Dan. If you're such a fiscal conservative, can always tell it's a good question when it starts like that, why aren't you condemning Trump's tariffs plan? Okay, boys and girls, tariffs are not in and of themselves economic policies. If someone tells you that Trump's economic plan is just tariffs, they're lying to you, or they are ignorant and they don't know what they are talking about. That is not what Trump has said. Tariffs are a lever, or a lever if you're British and you talk funny, is a means of effectuating future policy by shoving someone around, which you can really only do if you're holding the cards. America is an economic powerhouse. We hold a lot of the cards. So if Trump looks at Trudeau and says, hey, Justin, how would you like 25% tariffs? I know that was a terrible Trump impression. Just we'll move along from it. Trudeau, realizing that this would crash the Canadian economy, and by the way, it looks like his job as prime minister, Canada backs off and agrees to help the United States. By the way, Mexico has backed down as well. And a lot of countries that Trump, for example, suggesting that they need to kind of pay their way forward in NATO so that it's not the United States footing the entire bill, has caused a lot of European countries to actually start paying their way. That's really just economic blustering. You recognize the large arms the United States has, and so you swing them around like Popeye a little bit and try to effectuate what it is that you want. That's really all there is there. It's not long-term economic policy as much as some individuals, by the way, on both the right and the left, in favor of it and against, are claiming. So the next question is from Lexi. What do you think about an age limit or a term limit for members of Congress or the federal government? There's in theory and then there's in practice. Usually you'll say, in theory, I'm in favor of it, but in practice, I'm against it. For me, it's flip-flopped. In theory, I am against term limits because no one, period, should be allowed to tell you whom you can and cannot vote for. If they are a United States citizen and they live in your district, you want to vote for them? That's fine. It should be on you, the voter, to suffer the consequences of whom you vote for. The problem, though, is that people aren't involved in their primaries. Even those who are tuning into the show, whether you're listening to the radio, you're catching it on television, or you're tuning in via streaming service or the podcast, there's a good chance that you don't really pay a whole lot of attention to the primary structure. And so by the time we get to the election, it's Corpse A on the Republican side of the aisle and young hothead idiot on the Democrat side of the aisle, or flip it. And it's like, well, who do you choose? Do you choose the corpse who is probably not going to ruin things? Or do you choose the young hothead who is going to get caught goofing around in a theater? Shout out to Representative Lauren Boebert. So those things all said, what's the solution? A cognitive test, perhaps. Honestly, parliamentary or ethic rules inside the House of Representatives and the Senate that are established, in which a majority of the House or the Senate might be able to suggest, or perhaps some kind of a party process that are kind of internal committee rules, or a state GOP or state Democrat party rules. You don't have to pass a law in order to effectuate change all the time. You can, but term limits become a problem because, again, there's no set of standards that can articulate when a person would or would not be eligible. Cognitive tests are in and of themselves useful, but can be flawed. And anytime you have to set a standard, we can't even set a standard for voting ID law, which, let's start with voter ID law, and then we can talk about term limits. So at least as far as I'm concerned, that kind of frames up my thoughts to the general perspective. We're going to be back in just a second with a little bit of the bonus side of things that'll be available on the live stream over on YouTube and X. We'll catch you in a second on the radio land. Take care. This has been the Tony Kinnett Cast here on 93 WIBC and the Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. It is the Friday after New Year's. It's good to be joined by my friend Ron Coleman. Now, not only is he a lawyer in civil litigation, appeals, speech, etc., he also, as you may be able to tell by the yarmulke on the back of his head, dude's a Jew. Now, this is the interesting part here, because Ron Coleman happens to be a Jew and a successful Jew at that. That means this show must apparently be operated by the Mossad or something. At least those are the going theories, or whatever I've been told by the goobers online. Ron, thanks for stopping by.
Controlling pretty much the weather, the money, and the Shabbos Goyim. And thank you for that, Tony.
I wanted to give you a different introduction than you normally get.
That's actually becoming pretty much my common introduction.
Oh no! Well then, we'll shift right over to the topic that I wanted to get your opinion on. Obviously, since the Las Vegas and the New Orleans terror attacks on New Year's, we've seen, of course, in the case of the FBI talking about the details from the New Orleans terror attack on Bourbon Street, that the guy had an ISIS flag in his truck, on his truck. And immediately, as soon as I saw that, and I went kind of to the online spaces to see if there were any additional details, my mistake. Apparently, the fact that there was an ISIS flag, because the Islamic State and ISIS as well, they perpetuate these terror attacks every Christmas season. Apparently, this is a CIA, deep Mossad, secret Jewish operation. So,
right. The people who are our most bitter enemies are, in fact, false flag operations, which is really extremely convenient because, like most good conspiracy theories and all conspiracy theories involving the Jews, these hypotheses are unfalsifiable.
Because you don't have the evidence, then the evidence was like prematurely obscured by the Jewish plot, or what do you mean?
If it's good for the Jews, then of course the Jews did it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
If it's bad for the Jews, well, of course the Jews want you to think it's bad for the Jews. If it has nothing at all to do with the Jews, that's only because you haven't yet seen how it benefits the Jews.
Gotcha.
So yeah, and of course, who is our favorite conspiracy monger? Who is the person whose entire life is obsessed with the Jews? But the great how can I forget her name?
Oh, Candace Owens?
Candace, right.
Oh, yeah.
Candace
The Frankists, as she called them, I guess once, or she's when she's not being offended by Babylon Bee jokes.
Seth Dillon is Jewish, of Jewish birth, notwithstanding his present Christian faith, which is just an act, because he's really the Jew.
Which I appreciate. By the way, apparently Baptists are also run by the Jews because we're not Catholic. I found that out very recently.
Although nothing could be more Catholic, nothing could be more Jewish than the Vatican.
every bit of the weird conspiracy wings that I constantly see, it's frustrating because when I look at reporting media today, the broadcast legacy media completely failed, right? They threw away all of their credibility to drive a specific narrative, and it didn't matter what the evidence was about a certain story that should be reported. They reported the narrative, and then they obscured anything that didn't fit into this crudely made jigsaw puzzle. And now we have the independent journalism age, right? And so exactly, finger quotes galore. And I'm getting online to see some information about this New Orleans terrorist attack, about the Las Vegas truck. And all I'm seeing so far is a bunch of major accounts go, oh, this is clearly a false flag operation. And they say, look at the timing. And I swear, if I hear one more person say, look at the timing regarding any event, there's always something with the timing. Every day of the year, right. There's always something with the timing.
It's always an attempt to distract us from. That is really a lame hypothesis. What could possibly, in a world of multitasking and artificial intelligence, it's one thing to say we're going to distract the 4 TV networks and the 3 national newspapers.
Right.
So that they won't report on something that we don't want the public to know. But nothing's lost anymore. There's no distracting. It's all it's all there in real time and in high definition. No, the timing is definitely never going to be proof of anything. But again, also it can't be falsified because, as you say, there's always something else going on. If in doubt, they want to distract from Gaza. Okay, there's.
Oh, right. Oh, the reason this terror attack happened is so that the world would not pay attention to the genocide in Gaza that's going on. Oh, they're. By the way, my latest favorite argument about why it has to be a genocide. Is because the casualties are so one-sided. So apparently, according to some of the real master galaxy brain thinkers, the Hamasniks, because again, as we saw just in the most recent terror attack in New Orleans, the guy had like IEDs in his truck. The IEDs did not go off. Radical Islamic groups are really bad at waging war. All thumbs, about half a Lego block for a brain, putting some of this stuff together, and they're not very good at waging war. Been a good 1,000 since the caliphate. Been a while. But apparently, because they are losing in Gaza, this is evidence of genocide. What?
Well, genocide. They had the genocide narrative ready to go on command. It was already in place regardless of what Israel did on October 8th. It was going to be, because remember, the genocide already preceded the genocide in which the group being victimized by an all-powerful group that is infinitely well-armed and has neither pity nor concern for what anyone else thinks about them. This genocide has resulted in a population increase.
Which is just, I mean, that's...
Because if there's one thing we say about the Jews, they cannot execute. Except when they do execute in a way that makes us think someone else is executing, because in fact, they execute perfectly because unfalsifiable.
It really is great. I mean, obviously, there's a million pinholes that we could poke in this if we took this argument, seriously at all, which you shouldn't. Again, because of the amount of aid that's been let in, like you said, the population increase and a number of other things. But when I step away from that and then I look at this terrorist attack, it was amazing how quick, as soon as it was an act of Islamic terror, how quickly some of these accounts that are like for independent journalism are so terrified of ever saying, you know what? Man, I got to tell you, some of this like radical Shia or in some aspects, some of the radical Sunni Islamic terror is bad. I know, brave statement, but they freak out if you say that. No, actually, it was all because of the Jews. The Jews are secretly running Islamic terror, which is one of the most incredibly stupid things I have heard in my entire life. And you can't say that because they'll say, oh, you just don't know because you're just a...
Well, because as Candace and her friend Jake were saying...
Oh, was this Jake? Was it Shields?
Yeah.
The guy who probably couldn't draw his own name with crayon? Yeah, that goober.
So Netanyahu established ISIS for purposes of destroying the West and, of course, committing acts of terror against everything that you would think would be in his interest, but it's not really in his interest because it's really...
It's the same. The Mossad actually created Hamas. There was this. I was Johnny Wedmore, this British or New Zealander, I can't remember, from a radio station that is now closed in Europe, actually, TNT Radio or whatever it was called, and that was his theory. Oh, have you not seen the evidence that actually the Mossad created Hamas to kind of create international pity for them? It's like, you think that Israel needed international pity in a faux organization after World War II? Are you serious? They don't hear themselves.
There's nothing to talk about except that Elon Musk, by also preventing the people who were saying this from being further monetized in their saying of this, for reasons having, perhaps, according to him and according to others, I don't really know. Of course I know. I don't really know, though. Having more to do with platform manipulation than anything else. Turns out that he's really doing it to censor their comments about the Jews. Except they're getting censored, but they're not getting paid anymore. See,
I did love how this whole thing started because someone changed their profile picture, which temporarily removes the blue check next to your name while it's reviewed. I just did that with my satire account, switched it from the Ministry of Truth to the Ministry of Project 2025. New administration, put on a new shirt, and it took a few days. The blue check mark was back, and it is really funny though, especially with guys who are saying wildly gross stuff. I mean, again, it's objectively wildly gross stuff. And it's not that they're banned off the platform. They can still spew whatever it is that they want. But by being verified, advertisers have to endorse what it is that they're basically, that opens them up to receive money from the advertising. And it's Elon, if you do not endorse, not just allow, but if you don't endorse this language, then you're really anti-free speech.
Not just endorse it, but actually subsidize it.
Yeah, because of the payouts every 2 weeks. You're right.
Financially subsidize it. Well, there you go.
I'm sorry
win
that
for losing.
I didn't bring you on for a more lawyerly expository, like the last time that we had you on. I'm talking to Lou. We're going to try to get you on in a regular fashion, because sometimes there really just are no better words than just to sit here, and it's like watching someone walk into a clear plate glass door. There's not much else that can be said than just really.
But I mean, it really does speak to where we are now. I mean, that this is such a constant refrain, and people are comfortable saying and being quoted as saying the kinds of lunatic fringe stuff that you would never have dreamt would be part of polite conversation.
It's really weird. It's like you got one. So it's the conspiracy theory argument that's made. The difference between a conspiracy theory and reality is 6 months. And there are two kinds of conspiracy theories. There are someone overtly, recently, clearly, with evidence tried to hide something. And then there are like the old, ancient, wild conspiracy theories that came out of people smoking far too much of various substances in their basements. And we're expected to say, oh, those are both the same because they're conspiracy theories. So they're all conspiracy theories are equally viable. And
right,
I just,
it was very fashionable, and I'm sure I retweeted this myself several times. The difference between a conspiracy theory and the news is 6 months.
Right.
Okay, very good. Well, there's a limit to that. So a lot of people are also, I'm hearing a lot of people saying, well, but isn't demonetization really just a form of, isn't that a form of a chilling effect on free speech? Well, these people obviously aren't going to chill, right? We know that's one thing we know. Second of all, to say that, you see, if you own a social media platform, it just may make sense for you to want to protect the experience of the 98% of people who don't want to hear about the synagogue of Satan nonstop by knocking. So, but Ron, isn't it a slippery slope? It may be a slippery slope, but you do have to draw the line somewhere, because otherwise, in no time at all, and this is where we're heading, X becomes Gab.
Yeah. And that's the key. And I think about this actually in a more logistical way. So stepping away from the ideological discussion at play and to the other ways that people can manipulate and misuse X as a social media platform. So one of the things that's also being changed is the algorithm in which engagement and therefore likes and retweets and monetization is carried out. And that involves basically making it more difficult for a lot of large bot networks and these click farms in order to generate fake engagement by just clicking like and then moving on, or clicking retweet from a bot account and then moving on. It makes it more difficult. I don't see anyone saying that's a censorship of free speech. No, that's doing the gardening. Is that in order to make X a valid platform, you actually need real engagement from real people to be more impactful. And Meta is currently, messing around with the opposite side of this. Is that Meta, being Facebook and Instagram, have suggested introducing AI fake accounts onto the platforms in the next couple of years, because a lot of people are leaving Facebook especially, and advertisers don't want that. Advertisers don't want to hop into a little fake matrix, just like advertisers don't want to hop onto Gab. That matters. And by the way, me as well. I'm not on Gab for a good reason. There's nothing happening there.
That's right. People have to. It is a slippery slope, but as a business owner, in a way, almost everything's a slippery slope. You have to make judgment calls.
Yeah.
When you say that censoring Nazis is no different from censoring the president, the sitting president of the United States, when he says, "Everyone, please go home and peacefully return to your home."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you tell me that that you can't find any flat ground on the slippery slope between those two things, I'm going to tell you you're not trying. You're not trying. The old X, or the old Twitter, was involved in censoring the views of 30, 40, 50% of the country. We're talking now about a sliver of the country. You got to make the call. Just like you make the call with pornography, you can make the call. It's okay. The world will come to an end. I've never been a free speech absolutist, and I've always said that. What I've always said is be clear what your standards are and enforce them equally across the board.
Well, and the argument that usually is thrown back in response, and I know that we've kept you over time, and I'm sorry about that.
I'm fine with it.
The argument that I've often heard thrown back is so that there will, the Jews, because of course this all comes down to actually the secret Jewish plot to limit speech, is that the Jews don't want you to question them about their super secret, ultra secret text that even they're not allowed to tell you about, and all this other stuff, that somehow this is a measure that is meant to protect the really awkward misquote. What is that? The misquote of what, Isaiah? The synagogue of Satan thing?
I mean, I
misquote of some.
Let's get into apologetics. Christians believe one thing,
right,
but how to learn that proof text, and Jews believe something else.
But that's the catch, though. It's like none of the stuff that we've talked about actually, censors conversation between those who are Jewish and those who are Protestant, those who are Catholic. It's the most elementary form of gaslighting to suggest that
also there's also this idea of collective guilt,
right?
Let's say that all the Bolshevik leaders in 1928 were Jews, which they weren't, but let's say they were. Okay, I'm not a Bolshevik leader. My dad wasn't a Bolshevik leader. My grandpa wasn't a Bolshevik leader. Like, what does that have to do with me? I'm not a Bolshevik.
Because there has to be a sin that is laid at your feet that is tantamount to the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime during World War II, right? So if all Jews are secretly Bolshevists, then you're equally as responsible for the Soviet Union and Mao and everything else as you are for this. It is none of this stuff is remotely deep conversation. It's the most bleach drinking swill that I'm seeing. And that's, look, as an independent journo guy, whatever, guy who's trying to do broadcasting and trying to do analysis, this stuff is making it really easy to unfollow certain accounts. It's like, I want to find details.
People really are showing themselves for who they are. There's no question about that.
It's like, I want to find more details about how the FBI is doing a good job or a terrible job and report on that. And instead it's, an ISIS flag. You know what that means? There's a big CIA logo next to it. It's like, for the love of God, that does nothing to help this at all, other than make my job more difficult because I now have to sift through your aluminum foil hat techniques.
All right, listen, that is where we are on the first business day of the new year.
Woo! Ron Coleman, thanks for hopping on. And as always, thank you for making sure that the technological dust fog, which obviously was dropped by the drones of New Jersey, by the Israeli state of Antarctica's ice wall, granted us all with blessings in this beautiful new year.
Amen. Catch you later.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.